President Trump and the White House taking the bull by the horns on the tax plan. Roll tape.
This change, along with a lower business tax rate, would likely give the typical American household around a $4,000 pay raise.
There's a big literature that looks at how lots of other countries have done the same thing and how their wages responded. And we take a very conservative edge of that literature, like the low-end estimates, apply the Trump tax plan to it, and get that it's going to increase wages for American workers by about $4,000.
Reducing the corporate tax rate from 35 to 20% would increase average household income by $4,000 a year.
Well, that is the major talking point and selling point. $4,000 extra in the pockets of working families. Ed Lazear is with us, former chair of the President Bush's Council of Economic Advisors. Ed, great to have you back with us.
Pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
That $4,000 number, Kevin Hassett justified it yesterday, went through the math. You with it?
Right.
I mean, are we going to get $4,000 in the pocket of working families if we get the tax rate down to 20%?
Well, the question, of course, is whether we get enough growth to generate that kind of earnings increase over time. Kevin's numbers are based on the end of the period, so it's essentially saying when all the growth numbers are in, then we can expect $4,000. And that's not too far out of line with the numbers I came up with. In my Wall Street Journal piece, I had numbers that were a bit smaller than that, about half actually, but the difference was that I was looking at the average over that period. He's looking at the end of that period. So it's quite possible. I mean, we're not, the reality is we're not that perfect at predicting these sorts of things, but the number is not a crazy number.
But it makes sense,
if we get the kind of
sorry, but if you want to sell something and you want to bring it down to the level where everybody understands it, you say, I'm going to put X $1,000 in your pocket if we get this tax cut. That's a pretty strong selling point, if you ask me.
Well, it is, and I think the tax plan is pretty good, even as it stands right now. I had some suggestions for some modifications, but even as it stands right now, I think it's definitely a step in the right direction, and I do think it will grow the economy, and it will affect the middle class primarily in two ways. First, the direct tax cuts. We don't know exactly what they're going to look like until we see how the brackets play out and how the rates play out. But the second thing, of course, is that when you have economic growth, that translates into productivity growth. Productivity growth turns into wage growth. So some of that, at least a significant fraction of that, is going to be passed on to the middle class. And so I think that the administration is actually not spinning this tale. This is actually something that is consistent with the kinds of numbers that we've seen in the past. So,
heaven forbid.
So I'm pretty much on their side on this one.
Heaven forbid that the Republican Party rejects a tax cut like this. But let's move on. I want you to listen to what Senator Paul had to say about his vote on the budget. Hold on a second, Ed. Roll tape for us.
We as Republicans say we are for these budget caps. If we'll say and do what we say we're for, I'll vote for the budget. But if we're not going to be conservative, I can't vote for it.
What do you say, Ed? Senator Paul standing in the way of the budget, which therefore stands in the way of tax cuts?
Well, first of all, I think it would be a disaster to refrain from passing any kind of tax reform right now. That would be terrible. We really need to get the economy moving. We've had very slow growth, and this is probably the most important thing we can do at this stage to enhance economic growth for the next few years. So I think that would just be a terrible thing to do. I am sympathetic to the senator's view. We obviously can't blow up the budget. But I think that he's focusing on the wrong thing. And the reason is this. If we look out and we say, well, let's use Congressional Budget Office numbers, CBO numbers, we know that in a couple of decades, we're going to be at a point where we have a debt-to-GDP ratio of something like 150% of what it is right now. And all of that, almost all of that, is on the entitlement side. It all has to do with increases in medical expenditures and retirement expenditures. And, so the kinds of things that we're talking about are essentially rounding error relative to that. in order to get the budget under control, we have to deal with the more significant problems. And these kinds of issues are just second or third order at this point. So, you know, while I'm sympathetic to the point of view that we got to control the budget, no question about it, this is just not the right way to do it. And I think it's counterproductive.
Just get it done. Ed Lazear, thanks for joining us, sir. We'll see you again real soon. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.